Hello Year 5, welcome to English for today. Now before we get going on our English lesson, I just wanted to talk to you about what happens in the chapter You'll Like It When You Get There in Cosmic. Okay, if you have a copy of the book, then feel free to read it, check my summary and see if you agree with it. Now, after we finished yesterday, Liam had just decided that he needed to pretend that Florida is his daughter to go on the Drax World trip of a lifetime. So he in this chapter talks about how he is going to try and get Florida to agree. However, big problem, she's not talking to him. She's mad at him about what happened in the car dealership and how they nearly got into big dangerous trouble. Okay, so it's taken him ages to convince her, and the only way he's able to talk to her is during the drama club that they both go to, where they are actually pretending to be a dad and a daughter. And he uses this scene to try and convince her, and she still says no, because she says, I'm too busy doing other things. And he hasn't told her where exactly they've got to go either. So afterwards he's still trying to convince Florida to go, and eventually, once he mentions limousines and other cool celebrities things, she agrees, and they make a fake letter all about a gifted and talented trip to the Lake District, even though where they're really going is to China. But the chapter finishes with Liam saying, I didn't tell her that we're going to China. I just said we're going down south, because technically China is south from here. Very sneaky. Do you think that is going to play out well for Liam? Ooh. Okay then, right. Today's English lesson is all about using embedded clauses. Now, we're going to start with a little bit of a review. What is a relative clause and where can we find them in a sentence? Now, we did relative clauses last term, so your first challenge today is to pop me on pause and take a minute, 2 minutes to write down everything you remember about relative clauses. Are there any special words that we might need to use? Are there any special punctuation that we might need to use? How much can you remember? Are you a master of relative clauses? And will you manage to get all of the information I've got on my screen? And extra bonus points if you manage to put in some examples as well. Okie dokie. I hope that you've got lots and lots of things to share. I would love to see what you remembered. Okay, a relative clause is something that adds extra information to a sentence about a noun. It uses either who, which, where, when, whose, and that at the start of it. Now, did you remember all about our punctuation? Did you remember that you've got to have a comma before it? You've got to have that, unless you are using this cheeky that. That one does not need a comma in front of it. And what examples did you think of? Did your examples use these words? Well done if they did. Give yourself a pat on the back. Let's have a look at today's learning. Okay, I do embedded clauses. Now, an embedded clause is something that adds extra information in the middle of a sentence. It's always sandwiched between two commas, and that is really important. So embedded means inside something. So if you were to think of an embedded clause like a sandwich, if your favourite sandwich is like mine, a tuna mayo, then the embedded clause would be the tuna mayo, and the commas on either side would be the bread. Okay, you always have commas on either side, just like you always have a slice of bread on either side of your tuna mayo. Okay, the rest of the sentence, much like with our relative clauses, has to make sense without it. For example, we've got Liam, as if by magic, led Florida to China. And we've got Liam, as if by magic, led Florida to China. Our tuna mayo, our sandwich filling, is the as if by magic. The commas are the bread. And if we took those out, we'd still have Liam led Florida to China. It still makes sense. Let's find out some more. Okay, relative clauses and relative pronouns. Max was making a clay sculpture. He loved art lessons. Now here we've got the second sentence adding some extra information to the first, so we can change it from two sentences into one using a relative clause. It becomes Max, who loved art lessons, was making a clay sculpture. We've got our who here, which is a relative clause word. It is sandwiched by our two commas, and if we took it out, it would say Max was making a clay sculpture, so it would still make sense. Okay, how do we create a relative clause? The Eiffel Tower is one of the busiest tourist attractions in the world. The Eiffel Tower is in Paris. Now that's two sentences, both with bits of information. Can you turn those two sentences into one using a relative clause? Have a think about which words you might want to use. Remember your commas sandwiching that relative clause. Okie dokie, have you managed to turn that into one sentence? Let's have a look. The Eiffel Tower, which is in Paris, is one of the busiest tourist attractions in the world. Did you manage to find that? Did you manage to put that relative clause in the middle? It still makes sense without it, because if we take it out, the Eiffel Tower is one of the busiest tourist attractions in the world. It's exactly the same as our first sentence up here, but we've added the second sentence as a relative clause instead. Okay, can we spot the relative pronouns? The following are examples of sentences that have relative clauses. You're starting with our collection of words. Can you spot them? Okay, let me get my highlighter out. Okay, 25 Maple Street, which has been up on sale for years, is apparently haunted. 25 Maple Street, which has been up for sale for years, is apparently haunted. And as well as my which, I've got my commas sandwiching my relative clause. We can double check it by taking it out. 25 Maple Street is apparently haunted. That still makes sense, but we've got more information. A ghost, whose name is Mr. Stonegarden, roams the corridors. A ghost roams the corridors. We've got our sandwiched commas here. And in the middle, we've got whose name. Whose name? The ghost's name is Mr. Stonegarden. The estate agent, who badly needs a sale, is frightened to show people around. The estate agent is frightened to show people around. We've got our relative clause in the middle, starting with who, and we've got our commas there as well. What do you notice about the position of all of the relative clauses we have found so far? Yes, they are inside, in the middle of our sentences. They were all in the middle of, or embedded. That's what embedded means. It means in the middle, just like our tuna mayo sandwich. Therefore, we can also call them embedded clauses or embedded relative clauses, because they are in the middle. Okay, the position of relative clauses. The children all did well in the spelling test, which made their teacher smile. Looking at this sentence, we've got our comma. Where's my highlighter go? We've got our comma and we've got our which. But what has happened to the position? It's no longer embedded. It's not in the middle. It is at the end of our sentence. So this is not an embedded clause because it's at the end. It is after the main piece of information. It's still got our comma and it's still adding extra information. And our sentence would still make sense without it, but it is not in the middle and it's not sandwiched between two commas. It's still relative, but it's not embedded. Okay, embedded clauses. Luke, as soon as he heard the news, rushed to the hospital. Now, this isn't a relative clause. It's set up in the same way. It's in the middle, and we've got my commas on either side. It's still a sandwich. However, it does not have one of our relative pronouns. It does not have one of our keywords. As is not one of our keywords for relative clauses. However, this is an embedded clause. It adds additional information and it's sandwiched by its commas. So let's play a little game. We're going to decide if the clauses in the following sentences are relative embedded clauses or just embedded clauses. Some of them will be relative and some of them won't be. Okay, Reese, even though he hated films, went to the cinema. Have a think. What do you think? Relative embedded clause or normal embedded clause, not relative? Well, I've got my commas, so it's definitely embedded. But I don't have one of my words, so I think this one is an embedded clause, not a relative clause. It is an embedded clause. Well done. The crocodile, which had been lurking under the water, pounced towards its prey. Ooh, is this a relative or a non-relative embedded clause? What do you think? I've got my commas, but what is that key word that I've got? Which? Yes, I think this one is a relative embedded clause. Very good here. Okay. The distraught teacher threw the test papers onto her desk, which she had spent the morning tidying. What do you think? I'm not going to help you with this one. Have a think. What can you spot? Ah, did I get you? This is just a relative clause. It isn't embedded as it appears after the main clause. So we've got our relative clause, but we don't have anything after it. So it's a relative clause, but it's not embedded. I hope I didn't trick you too badly there. Okay, so that is our whistle-stop tour of embedded clauses. Let's have a look and see if we can work out which one is right and why. So do you think the red one is an embedded clause or the blue one is an embedded clause? Pause here, have a think, tell me which one is right and why. Okay, well let's read them out loud first. We've got Florida, a little loudly, began to shout and scream. Florida, a little loudly, began to shout and scream. How can we check if it's an embedded clause? Let's look for our commas. We've got a comma here and a comma here. So in between should be our embedded clause. If we take it out, we would have Florida began to shout and scream. That still makes sense. So we've got Florida, comma, a little loudly, comma, began to shout and scream. Our embedded clause in this one is a little loudly. Okay, let's have a look at this one. Florida A, comma, little loudly began, comma, to shout and scream. Now, this one doesn't seem to make sense to me, but let me check it. Let's take out the bit in between our comma. It says Florida A to shout and scream. That does not make sense. We've got our commas in the wrong place. Okay, so that is not a correct embedded clause. Okay, pause me here. Can you invent your own? Give me 2 or 3 embedded clauses. See if you can find a noun and then add some information. An extra spicy challenge for you. Can you use a relative clause in there as well that is not who? Okay, guys, I hope that you've managed to use the rules that we've looked at today to help you with your embedded clauses. Let's go on and see what your task is today. Okay, so you do embedded clauses. You are going to choose your level. You cannot go straight on to exploring. You've got to start on learning, then do using or exploring, or start on using and go on to exploring. So your learning is rembedded, which is a relative embedded clauses sheet. Your using is adding embedded clauses sheet. And then your exploring is your mini burst. Can you write a confession letter from Liam to his parents explaining where he was going? Jam-pack those embedded clauses in. So a confession letter will be all about him admitting that he has not gone to the Lake District, but he has gone to China to find the rocket theme park. Okay? So, things to remember. Things to remember. Okay, things to remember. Number one. Ooh. Sandwich that clause. Number 2 are relative words. And try and challenge yourself to use as many different relative words as possible today to make your writing sparkle. Have a fantastic time doing your English today, guys, and I will see you later.